Hey guys, it's Brandy with Eternal Harvest Home Decor, and today I'm going to show you how I created this new design for a table base. I'm really in love with it, turned out great. It's probably an intermediate project, but I'll walk you through the steps and provide the plans. Stick around. So I started this build off like I do all my builds with a quick trip to Home Depot for supplies. All the supplies and materials will be listed below and also on my website. I will not be including supplies for the top because I'm going to make that a separate video. It all started with these two pictures that my customer sent me. She wanted me to create a table with legs that look similar to that, and I decided to combine them. I start by cutting my 4x4 post to the height that I will need, which is 29 inches tall. That combined with the 1.5 inch top will give me 30.5 inches tall for a table, and that's standard table height. Next, I grabbed my 2x4s to start cutting the apron lengths, and I started with the longer side. This entire project is based off of a 7-foot long table. If you want something that's smaller, or if you're building a different size table, just adjust your aprons to match. And then quadruple check your measurements like I do here 1,800 times. I've had this miter saw for almost a year now, and I've got to say it's been one of the best ones I've ever owned. It's a great miter saw, it's the Delta Cruiser. I get a lot of questions about my tools, so I thought I'd throw that in there. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do have a video on miter saws and how to use them. Next, I lay out the apron and the posts and begin to kreg jig the ends. This is what I'm going to use to join the aprons to the legs. This kreg jig creates a pocket hole on the side of the 2x4, which will allow me to screw the 2x4 to the 4x4 post. I also have a video on kreg jig and how those work, but any pocket hole system will work great. If you're using them with glue, they create a really strong joint. I definitely recommend this jig to any new beginner woodworker or even intermediate. It really helps with joinery and makes things go a lot quicker. This is set up to be used with 1.5 inch pieces. So a 2x4 is actually 1.5 inches thick, and all I have to do is set this jig and then I'm on my way. I usually add 2 pocket holes to each end of all the apron pieces. This pocket hole system also tells you what size screws you should be using, and they actually make screws for all those depths. I'll be using 2.5 inch coarse screws to attach the apron to my legs. Now I'm going to lay a 1 inch thick piece at each side of the apron to lift it up a little bit and make sure the apron's going in the middle of the 4x4. It's just a little quick trick, helps me make sure everything is level, and I'll do that all the way around the table. I always start with my shorter side first when I'm building a table. I usually work alone, so it's the easiest way to get the table mostly put together and then flip it over to do the last piece, as you can see here. Then I do the long side, I add the glue, spread the glue, and attach the screw. And from here I'll flip the table over, and then I use a clamp to hold one side of the 2x4 while I screw in the other side. If you work alone, this is super handy. Clamps can act as another set of hands for you when you're in the shop, if you work alone like I do. I'm also using Type-On 3. It is water resistant and one that I like to use with tables. Now that the basic structure is all done, I'll let it sit overnight and set. I'll also add the cross pieces in the morning and try out the tabletop pieces to make sure it looks the way I want. Then I'll move on to the trim for the legs. For this portion, I grabbed some 1x4s and turned my miter saw to a 45 angle. I'll cut the first 45, take it over to the post and measure, and then cut the second 45 not parallel or in the opposite directions. Your 45 should be totally opposite to be able to go around the base, as you can see here. Then I'm going to glue with my Type-On 3, and I will use my 18 gauge nailer all the way around for the base. This part can be a little tricky, so I tried really hard to take my time and make sure each post was done individually and then glued and nailed into place. Next, I marked the center of my post with a pencil and a square, and I took my 1/2-inch molding pieces and ran them through my planer. If you don't have a planer, that's okay. This isn't always necessary. You can buy them pre-planed. These are just some pine gardening stakes that are kind of rough, so I ran them through my planer and laid each of them at each corner where I'll be using them. Now, because of the way that the math worked out, and guys, I was told there would be no math, I'm terrible at it. Thank heavens for SketchUp. To have the same size gap on all 4 sides of the post, that would mean that I'd need 2 pieces at 1 inch and 2 pieces at 1.5 inch on either side. So I needed to rip down a few of my 1.5 inch pieces. To attach these pieces, I decided to use a pin nailer instead of an 18 gauge nailer. This leaves a way smaller hole and it's way less noticeable, less to fill, etc. And I lined those up on either side. I started with the 1 inch pieces and then I did the 1.5 inch pieces on either side. Glued and pin nailed those into place. I decided to slow down this process for one of the legs to show you exactly how it's done. This nailer is so fast and did a really great job. This little pin nailer, you can barely see the pinholes there. And I did the 1 inch pieces first on this side and then attached the 1.5 on the other side. Now for the pieces that went on the side where the apron was, I did have to cut out a part of my trim. So I lined it up there and made a mark with where the apron came down. And then I made a mark at how deep. Lifted it up, marked it on the bottom, and those became my guides to cut out the notch. Now a bandsaw would probably be the most professional way to notch this out, but I had my table saw out and I decided to use that to do the longer side of the notch, and then I used my miter saw to chip that out. And here is the basic shape of the table and the trim work on the legs. I need to attach this one last piece, and then we can start cutting the smaller pieces to go in between. So I need 12 of these 1.5 inch squares for each post. I need 3 on each side. So I decided to set up a little stop block here that gave me exactly 1.5 inches, and then I will cut all of my little squares and install those with the pin nailer. Once I had my squares, I also cut a 6.5 inch long piece as a guide. I'll put my top square in first, use my 6.5 inch piece to know where to place my second block. And then the last block just sits on top of the bottom 1x4. The pin nailer worked perfect for this. You could barely see the hole, and I was able to go around and install each of these blocks. It is tedious work, but it really adds something to these legs. Last, I grabbed this 1/2 inch by 1/4 inch trim pieces from Lowe's, and I cut those to fit around the middle part of each leg. I just really wanted to jazz it up a bit, and I feel like these did a really great job. And after completing and attaching the top, it was time to stain. I'm going to be doing another video on how I glue up and join up my tabletops, and that will be the next video that's coming out. So make sure you subscribe, hit that little bell link so that you can get that to learn how I do my tabletops. Now this stain is one of my favorite colors, Min Wax Golden Oak, and I actually did mix this with a little of the Varathane American Walnut. I'll make sure and attach some links for both those colors and the nitrate gloves that I use that help keep my hands clean while I stain. And that's it, you guys. That is how I assembled this new table base that I'm absolutely in love with. It's pretty simple once you have everything, and I'll make sure and attach all of the plans on my website if you're interested. Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys, and for being interested in my projects. I love it. Hopefully they're helpful to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share. It helps me so much to continue to put out new content for you guys as much as I can. You can also find me and interact with me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm pretty quick to respond all of those places as well if you have any questions. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you next time.